We are now entering a period where some of the resistance, we'll call them bishops, these are the better bishops, diocesan bishops, oftenly, sometimes bishops with other kinds of posts, but who had been vocally resisting Pope Francis very publicly, writing letters talking about his errors and the errors of those he had kept around him. Well, they're now starting to write letters to the public about Pope Leo XIV. And this is interesting because I have one here from a bishop many of you have never heard of unless you've been watching this channel for a long time. That's Bishop Rob Mustaerts. He's an auxiliary bishop from the Netherlands. And he is very much call him moderately conservative, post-Vatican II kind of bishop. So the tone and tenor of what you're about to hear won't be surprising to anybody by any stretch of the imagination. Bishop Mustaerts is a measured voice, but here he's saying some fairly unmeasured things, and I offer it to you for your consideration. Today, I do, as usual, take the wait and see approach, cautiously optimistic, but waiting and seeing on how things will go. But here we have his letter, and I'm going to talk a little bit after that about some things I've received in the mail. And so if you are someone who sent me something in the mail in the last few months, stick around for after the letter. So here we go to Bishop Rob Mustaerts' blog, which is called the Purple Peppers blog. Seriously, it is his blog, complete with a link to all of his books. Here's his letter on Pope Leo XIV. The Roman Catholic Church is still alive and kicking in 2025. On May 8th, the new pope was announced. The enormous square in front of St. Peter's was filled with a mass of people. The whole world watched as white smoke appeared from that simple chimney, believers and non-believers. Everyone realized the enormous impact the Pope has on the world stage. Even in 2025, it is once again evident. Do not write off the Roman Catholic Church. It is on earth to stay. How many times has the Roman Catholic Church not been written off? People really thought that it would not survive the Roman period. The small group that stood at the base was expertly persecuted, harmed in a systematic way, and ended. But now look at Rome. Who still talks about Caesar Augustus, about Julius Caesar? The ruins in Rome are the only thing that still reminds us of them. And then look at that small Vatican state. There he stands, the successor of that insignificant fisherman, Peter. There he stands, Pope Leo XIV, the successor of Peter, in the presence of an unfathomable, enthusiastic crowd. The whole world watches with bated breath. What is it that makes the Roman Catholic Church survive all crises? I like to consult G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton sees the origin and mission of the Church as something divine, which explains its enduring power. He emphasizes that the Christian faith has a unique supernatural vitality. He even states that Christianity has died and risen repeatedly, just as its God has died and risen. Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave. In other words, the Church can rise again and again from situations of death because Christ himself has overcome death. Chesterton sees this as a continuing fulfillment of the promise that God will preserve his church. He is implicitly referring to the biblical guarantee that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. In addition to the theological foundation, Chesterton also emphasizes the historical evidence of the continued existence of the church. He points to concrete episodes in history in which the Christian faith seemed on the brink of the abyss, only to unexpectedly revive. He speaks vividly of about 5 near-death experiences of Christianity in history. Whenever contemporaries thought the Roman Catholic Church had gone to the sharks, it turned out that the sharks were the ones who died, and not the church, not the faith. Chesterton explicitly mentions 5 examples. 1. The Arian crisis of the 4th century. After the initial triumph of Christianity under Constantine, the Arian heresy arose, and the Emperor Julian the Apostate attempted to restore paganism. Christianity seemed a passing fashion, but despite everything, Orthodox doctrine survived. Julian was dismayed to find the faith he had thought dead was revived, while the old gods remained dead. 2. The medieval heresies, the Albigensians of the 12th and 13th centuries. Also in the Middle Ages, the soul was almost gone, and many expected the end of Christianity. The Albigensian heretical movement spread widely, but the church regained its strength and came out on top. Number 3, Renaissance and humanist skepticism of the 15th and 16th centuries. After the Middle Ages, humanist thinkers and the moral laxity of the Renaissance undermined faith. Deep skepticism arose, yet unexpectedly, yes, unexpectedly again, A revival followed, the Counter-Reformation, and figures such as Thomas Aquinas of the 13th century and later St. Ignatius and the Tridentine Reformation brought new life and intellectual vigor. Sons became fervent in faith where their fathers had been lukewarm. 4. The Enlightenment and the Age of Voltaire of the 18th century. During the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, the cultural elite turned en masse away from the church. Voltaire and his contemporaries saw Christian faith as a superstition that would soon disappear. But in the 19th century, the opposite happened. There was a surprising religious revival, such as the Oxford movement in England and a Catholic revival in France. What everything had thought impossible, a return of faith in a modern world, happened anyway. This, as it were, turned the ideas of progress upside down. 5. Modern scientific materialism after Darwin of the 19th and 20th centuries. With Darwin and the rise of atheism, it was again widely assumed that faith would finally evaporate. Around 1900, many intellectuals seemed to be becoming agnostics or atheists. Yet Chesterton saw in his own time the decline of that decline. A new generation of young people turned to the church with renewed interest. Where after Darwin it was thought that faith was impossible, faith flourished again among young people, something that 19th century authors would have found unimaginable. Chesterton emphasizes that this recurring resurrection of faith always came as a surprise to contemporaries. Historians and philosophers often predicted that religion would, flowing with the spirit of the times, and eventually dissolve into modernity. Instead, suddenly, something against the current, against all expectations. In 2025, we see this pattern repeating itself. Chesterton puts it succinctly, a dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it. By this image of a living force going against the current, he means that the church is a living organization, not a dead fossil. Through human cultural momentum alone, religion would naturally go with the flow and flow away. But the fact that Christianity repeatedly swims against the prevailing current proves that it inexplicably is alive. Time and again, the church has survived and even surpassed revolutions and upheavals. He notes this as a unique historical phenomenon. Where other worldviews and empires perished, the church ultimately remained standing as a structure that cannot be overthrown. The Colosseum is a ruin. The tomb of St. Peter still shines in all its glory. Each generation is faced with new challenges, but the church's tradition and wisdom always know how to formulate answers. In 2 millennia, the greatest minds, from church fathers like Augustine to modern thinkers like Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, Fulton Sheen, on the day of his death, Leo XIV was elected Pope, Newman, Ratzinger, and Robert Barron have answered the most difficult questions and defended the faith. There is no reason to think that this would be different today. If atheists launch new attacks, it will not be the first time that the church has been confronted with them. On the contrary, it would be the first time in 2,000 years that faith has failed to find a single response to cultural criticism. The historical awareness indicates that the church has a deep intellectual tradition that keeps her standing amid ideological storms. Another aspect is the liturgy and sacramentality of the church. They give the church an identity that is not dependent on one era, but that unites people of all times and cultures. This universal and timeless faith of the church makes her resistant to local or temporary decline. If the church is doing badly in one place, she flourishes elsewhere. The decline in Europe is more than compensated for by the growth in Africa. If the faith almost dies out in one generation, it revives in the next. We see that happening now too. Among the youngest generations, we find more practicing Catholics than the generation of their parents. On a philosophical level, we see that the truth claims and reasonableness, yes, we have arguments to support the truth of the faith, of the Christian faith, contribute to its survival. Chesterton joined the church. He converted to Catholicism in 1922 because he saw that the church consistently proclaimed the truth, even when it was unpopular. He praised Catholic teaching for its balance between extremes. The church has consistently found the middle ground between opposing errors throughout the centuries. In his book, Orthodoxy, Chesterton shows how Christian doctrines combine seemingly paradoxical truths, mercy and justice, reason and mystery, individuality and community, in a way that no human sect could have devised. He compares the doctrine to a key that fits the lock of reality exactly. This intellectual pervasiveness ensures that when other philosophies have become bogged down in one-sidedness, the Catholic synthesis is convincing. For example, pure rationalism leads to coldness, pure emotion to chaos, but Christian philosophy, as developed by great thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas, unites faith and reason. As a result, the church has a philosophical foundation that can withstand the storms of criticism. The church offers timeless truths that anchor a person in something eternal, and that is why both man and the church survive the changing currents of ideas. The adherence to enduring truths explains why the church endures longer than any fashionable ideology. The truth of faith is all determining. If Christianity is false, it is of no value. If it is true, it is of inestimable value. That only thing it cannot be is of any value. Dogmatic atheists may claim that all religion is illusion, but you can also turn that around by stating that the atheistic worldview is too limited to fully explain human experience. After all, if the world were only matter, our reason and truth-seeking abilities would be inexplicable. A stone does not seek truth and meaning. If a person, including his brain, were made up of only molecules and atoms, he would not do so either. The fact that we can strive for truth points to something supernatural. As long as people continue to ask fundamental questions, the Catholic message will continue to emerge as an answer, which guarantees the continued relevance and survival of the Church. For this reason, opposition and persecution paradoxically often increase the power of the Church. Every time people thought that Christianity was dead, a new saint or movement arose somewhere that proved the opposite. There were always innovators who revived the Church through their holiness and radical witness. Rather than weakening the Church, persecution and criticism have often purified and strengthened her. The Roman Catholic Church has an inner life force that is not of this world. It is like a living organism that adapts without denying itself, and like a rock that stands the test of time. The Church itself is built on a rock, on Peter and his successors. We have a new successor to Peter, Pope Leo XIV. The whole world was watching. Yes, we still matter. It is a sign of hope, hope that things will turn out well. How wrong they all were again with their predictions about the candidates who would become the new pope. There is a reason for that. The media think in political terms, in progressive and conservative, in liberal and conservative. That is not how it works in the Catholic Church. Pope Leo XIV is not the successor of Pope Francis, but of St. Peter. His task is the same as that of Peter, to proclaim the risen Christ and to make clear the implications of that for our time, to think about how that can best be given shape in our time. Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Viva Christo Rey. Signed, Rob Mustaerts, Bishop, on May 10th, 2025. As you can tell, he's one who's wanting to make it to suggest that the general cultural shift that most of us are seeing at this point, that has been going on really since November, and it's not because of Trump, but it's just, it seems like that was an inflection point, but he's not the cause of it. He may be just the person who was skilled enough to sense what was happening and to use it. But there is a cultural shift happening, and it's not just in America, it's across the West, at least, if not beyond the West. And that cultural shift, Bishop Mustaerts wants to put Leo XIV, the Holy Father, as a key figure for, and he may very well be that. But I do, of course, suggest exercising caution, because I can't escape remembering that for the first few months of his papacy, Pope Francis was heralded as a conservative Orthodox figure and who said the right things. However, we will let him do what he's going to do. We will watch and see and take in what he does honestly and pray for Pope Leo XIV, and I am cautiously optimistic. Do you share Bishop Mustaerts' more unbridled optimism there? He seems to suggest that this is the next great turning in the Church, kicking off with Leo XIV and key figures of the last century influencing the upswelling of new Catholics. I'm very curious if you share his optimism. Let me know in the comments. Can Leo fit in any way in the template of Peter the Roman? No, the traditional reading of the St. Malachi prophecy is dead. Dead as a doornail. And I'm not surprised, because it obviously didn't fit in with the rest of Catholic prophecy. I offered, I think a week or two ago on this channel, the alternate reading by a priest that a lot of people poo-pooed when I first time I brought it up like a year or two ago. But now, in hindsight, I suggest people go back and watch that, and I'll make it the recommended video after this one so that you can go and check that out, because the traditional reading, the mainstream reading, that the Pope after Francis was going to be Peter the Roman and then end times, that doesn't work. It just, on its face, does not work anymore. There's an alternate reading by a Catholic priest who noted some problems with the mainstream reading of the St. Malachi prophecy, and he accounted for them in his reading, and he has several more popes, even after the current one. I'll make that the recommended video after this one. Jeannie says, watch and pray. Yes. I'm not wanting to go have just, unhinged emotional reactions anymore, and I don't want to view everything with suspicion. I think it was Tim Gordon who coined a phrase like Pope traumatic Pope traumatic stress disorder, PTSD of a different kind, and it's what accounts for so many people just not being willing to even trust him at all, or only being cautiously optimistic. It's because things had been so bad even before Francis that people are having a hard time trusting. It's a process. And that's why I tell people, if you are one of those, God, Jesus Christ himself commands us to pray for pretty much everybody. You should have been praying for Pope Francis, not necessarily his intentions, but for him. We're commanded to pray for everybody. It's hard to have unreasonable suspicion about somebody if you are actively praying for them. And if he turns out to be the figure that we all hope he is, then actively praying for him will make it easier for you to accept that and to be on the correct side of things. And if he's not that figure, then praying for him will still be a good thing to do. It's a great act of charity. Rick McSquid says, I share the cautious optimism. Looks good so far, but there are plenty of bad actors in Rome after him. How he will deal with the super force is something that I am very interested in seeing, and I will be covering here for certain. Richard Corin says, I am holding my breath. Yes. AKC says, no, I wish I could share the optimism. Pope Leo's remarks on the Loggia were not subtle. It all depends on what he means by synodality. You're not going to have a pope who's going to just outright say, anytime soon anyway, that we're stopping Vatican II and all that stuff. That's not going to happen. But I don't know what he means by synodality. I know what Pope Francis meant by it. You saw it in his actions. It was a decentralization and elevating the voices of certain hand-picked laity to help influence things. What the Holy Father means by synodality, I don't know. But we will find out together. Margaret says, the more the church is ignored and the more turning away from God, society becomes wild, corrupt, and immoral. Yes. America, New Rome. America is America. It's its own empire. And 1,000 years from now, historians will speak about America in a way that compares it to past empires, but will probably clearly be its own thing. Laura says, not end times, we're heading into the era of peace as thought. Immaculate Heart of Mary will triumph. Yes, but the consecration needs to be done, and it needs to be done according to the instructions of heaven. That means the consecration of that one country and that one country alone in union with all the bishops of the world. For whatever reason, they can't get that right. They always either don't mention the country by name. Well, I don't mention it by name because YouTube does not like you mentioning that country by name for whatever reason. But it has to be that country and that country alone. Don't add other countries. Don't add the whole world. Just that country and all the bishops in communion with the Pope have to do it. And then they have to reveal the third secret. It wouldn't be that hard to do. Have it as a Holy Mass. At the beginning of the Mass, the Pope kneels before the altar, kind of like at the Asparagus for the High Mass in the traditional Latin Mass, and declare that this is the consecration as requested by Our Lady of Fatima. And then at the homily, he just pulls out the piece of paper of the third secret and reads it. Because I don't think we got the third secret in 2000. There are a lot of reasons not to think that. And then afterwards, and make sure that all bishops within 24 hours or whatever does the consecration in their diocese as well, according to the strict formula on pain of excommunication. He has the power to do that. Well, it says Holland is a desert with regard. It's like a desert with regard to Catholicism, but fortunately, Bishop Mustaerts has been given to Dutch Catholic believers. Yes. Laura says, we are exhausted. That's why we have walls up, but God loves us in his church. Yeah, there's definitely that sense too. There was a sense of exhaustion after the period of mourning with Pope Francis was over. It was remarkable. Jeffrey says, even if Pope Leo is a good shepherd, he's surrounded by wolves. This is why I tell people, you'll get answers to a lot of your questions when he starts making his personnel choices. Damian Keller, Our Lady, has said things about popes at La Salle and Fatima. She doesn't lie. There's a mandate from heaven that's been ignored. Yeah, basically. There are two instructions given in the message of Fatima. Sister Lucia talked about this a lot in the 1920s and the 1930s until she was silenced by Rome for some reason. And there were two sets of instructions. One for the Pope, and by extension, the bishops in communion with him, and another set for the laity. And the laity were supposed to keep the 5 first Saturdays devotion. We're supposed to wear the brown scapular, pray a rosary every day, and do the 5 first Saturdays devotion. None of that is covered by the Sabbatine privilege, by the way. Sister Lucia confirmed that herself. This is above and beyond the Sabbatine privilege. For whatever reason, laity don't want to do it. And probably for the similar reasons that the popes kind of dance around the consecration, which is maybe too much of an overemphasis on the mercy of God. Could be. Just a hypothesis, though. Pray for them, but do not trust them one iota, Patty B says. We shall see. We shall see. All right, folks. I did want to mention just a sort of a thing about mail. I haven't done a mailbag video in forever, so this is as close as you're going to get to a mailbag video. I have, as many of you have been watching for a while know, this is a new studio. I had been in a very different kind of studio beforehand, and this is a vast improvement over the old other. Still working on some of the bugs, but you know. But in the process of that move, in the preparation for it, I received a lot of mail, and then I lost a lot of mail. Now, you know, donations that I received went and got processed, but some of you included like email addresses and letters and things, and I couldn't read some of them. Others, they got just lost in the shuffle. So if you send me a donation and you sent an email, or if you didn't even send an email, or if you had an email address, or even if you didn't include an email address, send me an email. It's in the description box below, please. I have this thing where I like to send donors, give donors a access to my early access videos and things, just like anybody who supports their Patreon and the rest. And I know the woman who sent me this her name is either Kristen or Kirsten. I can't remember. You did include an email address and you had it typed, which is beautiful. And I love it. And I entered it 3 or 4 different ways and it could not work. She sent me this thing called Breathe Again Healing Salve. Its ingredients are calendula, linden flower, olive leaf, and something called EVOO, plus Revive Alive essential oils. Very fragrant. If you're into this kind of thing, you should go check it out. But unfortunately, I don't even have the website for it. So Kirsten, if you were there seeing this, email me, please, and I will happily give you another shout out with the proper information. I will do that for people. But if you've sent me a donation, especially in the last few months as I was preparing for things, I mean, the state of that office when I got all my furniture out of there was a catastrophe. It took my wife and I like 3 or 4 days to get it ready so that we could move my older son into that room for his new room. It was bad because it was such a small space. And so a lot of things got lost in the shuffle, and I apologize publicly to people for that. So if you sent me a donation, please send me an email. It's in the description box below. Put something about donation or mailbag or something in the subject line, because I have like 2,000 emails in my inbox right now because people send me things that I wish they wouldn't sometimes, including news articles about things that I've already covered in videos. So, you know, but I get added to email lists and things, and I can't. It just, my inbox has 2,000 emails in it right now. So please put something that I'll notice in the subject line referencing the donation you made, and I will be in communication with you. Chesterton Jess says, perhaps Leo XIV as an American Pope will be the juice to begin a true Catholic Renaissance in America. I have seen a couple anecdotal things about this. I want to talk about a potential Leo effect. Here's a couple things we can talk about. One of them is that certain seminaries now, including the Augustinians, have seen like a 400% increase or something in that ballpark of people putting out the feelers for pursuing a vocation with them, whether it's just as as just a religious or as a religious priest or whatnot. A lot of seminaries are suddenly having large increases in people sending them contacting them, asking questions. If you are somebody who works in a chancery somewhere, who is keyed in on the vocation situation, calls to the vocations director and that thing. And if you wish to remain anonymous, I guarantee your anonymity. I have priests who have given me tips before, and I protect their identity at all costs. I will not reveal them. If you've seen an increase since the Holy Father stepped out onto the loggia of young men inquiring about vocations, it's so early in this process that it just at this point would be inquiries and maybe initial meetings. Let me know, because I have seen signs that's happening, and people are putting out more feelers to OCIA, RCIA programs about entering the church. And we are only on day 10. Okay. So if you're looking for white pills, I'm not going to be a hopium, copium, as the kids say, factory here. I'm not going to only give you nothing but good news and whitewash anything that this Pope does, in case it's, he does, because if he does things that are of concern, we need to talk about them. And they need to be combined with prayer for him. And if necessary, for fasting and penance. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But there are indications that things are looking good, that he has made a very good public impression on a lot of young people who are looking to enter the church or enter religious life. So if you have that information, same as with what I just mentioned about donations, email addresses in the description box below. Put something in the subject line that'll make it so it's clear that what your contacts of your email are, because I've got like 2,000 emails in my inbox, and people send me stuff that I wish they wouldn't, and I get signed up for all kinds of wacky email lists that I wish I wouldn't. So make it something that I can see, because there are signs out there of this. I've heard of some places where suddenly mass attendance is going up again. We're 10 days in, and that's what people are saying. People are coming to mass more. Maybe some external factors for that. The economy is weird right now. Great signs on some fronts, not so great signs on others, and that could drive people to go to mass too. But his influence, his appearing Catholic, sounding Catholic, acting like a pope so far, seems to be reassuring a lot of people. And if there is a Leo effect happening, and if that's the Leo effect, then it deserves to be highlighted. It should be highlighted because it's going to impact every Catholic who takes their faith seriously's life. You may be, for instance, confronted with questions by people of, what do you think of the Holy Father? Someone who you know is not Catholic. And suddenly you realize that they may be considering entering the church. This is going to become a more profound question for those of you who do not trust him. Because what do? This person who seeks to enter the mystical body of Christ is suddenly, you going to shove black pills down their throat? I would hope not. This is a potential interesting question for a lot of people, but the initial effect seems very positive. Seminaries reporting greater queries. The Augustinians reporting a gigantic increase in queries from people. I'm curious what you think about this. Reveille America says the SSPX seminaries are seeing growth. Now, is that new growth? Because I know that they've been growing as a general rule for a while, as have the FSSP and other similar organizations. And no, the SSPX are not in schism. There are people who still believe that, even though Bishop Schneider worked on behalf of the Vatican in an official capacity to observe them for 2 years and wrote a report saying they're not in schism. Everything they do is Catholic. They even had pictures of Pope Francis at the time in their parishes, and pretty official sounding. His Greatness says the Wicked Witch of the West used emails, which would be quite the accomplishment, given that book was written in like 1905 or something. I know I have it on my bookshelf. If you ever want to read a kid-friendly piece of American literature that is so loaded with like old-fashioned, like late 19th, early 20th century libertarian right politics, The Wizard of Oz will blow your mind. That's another story for another time. Margaret says, I think Pope Leo is just using synod in terms of change, but a good change for the better. Right? If he just means we're going to listen to people who don't get typically listened to in the church and invite people who feel they've been ostracized for whatever reason to dialogue with the hierarchy, okay, whatever. That's probably fine. Probably even a good thing. I don't object to the hierarchy having conversations with the group of people that James Martin has a weird interest in. I don't. But it has to lead to a call to conversion and to leaving sin behind, stop identifying with your sins, even if it's done in the most kind-hearted sounding way possible. They have to be communicated to leave those sins behind, as do the rest of us who have an attachment to sin, which is most of us, by the way. It would be nice to hear a homily on sin and the four last things, and what the wages of sin are from time to time at the typical Sunday parish. Redeem says SSPX already have pictures of Pope Leo XIV. Yes, they do. The fact they were a couple days ago on X, the picture, actually it was yesterday, I think it was Dr. Taylor Marshall reposted something from, because I don't think he goes to an SSPX mass, you'd have to ask him, but I know he reposted something on X where it showed a picture of Bishop Fillet on the left, on the right, probably the local ordinary, and in the middle and slightly above those other two, the Holy Father. Again, if you're in schism, you don't do stuff like that. Leo's committed to Vatican II, and you're never going to get a pope who's not. You're never going to get a pope who's not this side of a bunch of mushroom clouds anyway. I would suggest that, people, if you have reservations about him, you pray for him. Christ commands us to pray for virtually everybody. Laura says, the Wizard of Oz is way ahead of itself. Yellow Brick Road represents gold money. If you follow it, there's a man running the show behind the scenes. Yeah, that book is, when you read it as an adult with, somewhere on the political right views, book is wild. And then you read about what L. Frank Baum was like. It's wild stuff. And you read what the sequels are like. It's one of those series that when you read it with hindsight, it's just shocking in a good kind of way. All right, folks. What's the difference between red, white, and black pills? Well, the red pill is supposed to be you're being woken up to reality. It's that scene from The Matrix where it comes from. You want to take the blue pill, which is keep believing the lie. The red pill, you want to see what the world is really like. And from there, the other pills developed. The white pill is the hope pill, hopium. Everything is great. Everything's going to be great. And the black pill is the opposite. Nihilism. Everything is doomed. The metaphor gets stretched at times because not everything is doomed and not everything is great. That's why I think the red pill is probably still the most realistic one, because it's you seeing things for how they are, which is not everything is great, not everything is terrible, but you're still taking a realistic assessment of things. Chester suggests says the Wizard of Oz is all about central banking. It is very much so about that. And the sequels are, he expands his critique on the things going on at the time. And I think it's the second one is about a young woman leading a revolt in Oz, where she gets all the women of the country to take over and put their husbands to work instead. And then they basically destroy everything. You can guess what that's a critique of. Again, this stuff's a hoot. And you don't see that reflected in almost any of the films because, of course, they toned it down. His greatness. Yellow brick. Yeah, the yellow brick road means gold. He was a big fan of the gold standard. They were talking even in 1900 about getting rid of the gold standard, which they eventually did in like the 50s or 60s. Ron says be balanced, right? Just be truthful, essentially. All right, folks. Curious what you thought, though, about Bishop Mustaerts' letter. Did you find it a little too hopeful? I like the Chesterton references, but I always do. Chesterton is great if used appropriately. He's wonderful. I appreciate the hopeful tone of Bishop Mustaerts, but there is a divide in the church, and it is still about those who look at Vatican II at least with suspicion, if not as like the source of the problem. I don't see it as the source of the problem. Problems in the church existed well before Vatican II, but it was one of those major inflection points. You can see it in the very orientation of the church itself towards the world. Changed dramatically before and after with some bad results. But I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. This is, again, a more casual Sunday live stream with a letter and then just casual conversation because it's Sunday. Make sure to go to Mass today if you can, and please, 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 please pray for those of us here in the Great Plains. I'm in Oklahoma. We had some wild weather last night, more today, and the newscasters, the weathermen, are very nervous about tomorrow. So Monday could be a pretty bad day. The word historic came up at one point from a meteorologist in Tulsa. I'm not enthusiastic. So please, prayers for us, and invoke saints like Saints Bernard and a few others who are known to be patron saints involved in natural disasters and things. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.